More than 2 centuries after Eseosa's village mournings, in the year 2122, the sun rose over a very different land. The town was called Silver Creek, Montana, in the US. It was not large enough to appear on most global maps unless someone zoomed in close. A scattering of homes, a church with a white steeple, a grocery, a mechanic's garage, a long stretches of farmland stitched together by quiet country roads. The cattle land sat just beyond the town's edge. If you stood at the highest part of the property and turned slowly in a circle, you would see fields in almost every direction, wheat, pasture, and long fence lines that ran like thin brown threads across the grass. At the center of it all stood the Carter house. The house had been built almost 80 years earlier by Daniel's grandfather. It was large but not grand in the way city houses were grand. Its strength came from its materials, thick timber beams, wide wooden floors, and deep porches that wrapped around the front and one side of the house. The wood had darkened with age, and every winter the wind carried the smell of pine through the cracks in the old boards. Daniel Carter had grown up inside those walls. The place carried memories in every corner, his mother's voice drifting from the kitchen, his father's boots by the back door, long evenings on the porch watching storms move across the fields. Daniel stepped out onto that same porch now, pushing the screen door open with one shoulder. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the smell of damp earth from the fields. He stood there a moment, mug of coffee in his hands, looking out across the land. The fields were already awake. A tractor hummed fairly in the distance. Two ranch hands were moving along the far fence line. The barn doors stood open, and the chestnut mare inside shifted impatiently in her stall. Daniel leaned one elbow against the porch railing. From a distance, a person might have thought he was simply admiring the morning, but he wasn't. He was remembering. 7 years earlier, the cattle farm had belonged to his parents. Daniel had helped run it, of course, learning the work the way boys raised on land always did, but the responsibility had not been his yet. Then, the accident happened. One raining highway, one truck that never slowed, and in a single night, the farm had become his. The house, the land, the accounts, all of it. People said he handled it well. They said he was strong. They said his parents would have been proud. Daniel wasn't so sure about any of that. He only knew that the farm was the one place where the quiet inside him felt manageable. A truck door slammed somewhere near the barn. Daniel straightened. A moment later, a man's voice carried across the yard. "Morning, boss." Daniel sighed faintly and started down the porch steps. "Tom?" he called back. "If you call me that again, I'm cutting your pay." Tom Alvarez laughed. Tom had been walking the cattle land since Daniel was a teenager. Broad-shouldered, sun-darkened, and calm in a way that came only from years of steady work. Tom had gradually become more than just a foreman. He was the one who knew where every fence post stood, the one who knew which horse was temperamental in winter, the one who had quietly stepped into the space Daniel's father left behind without ever trying to replace him. Daniel walked toward the barn, coffee still in hand. Tom leaned against the stable door, arms folded. "Fence near Milo's Creek need attention again," Tom said, and the irrigation sensors flagged something weird overnight. Daniel nodded. "I'll ride out there later." Tom watched him for a moment. "You slept?" Daniel gave a half shrug. "Enough." Tom knew better than to press further. Daniel had always been the kind of man who carried things inward rather than spilling them into conversation. They stepped inside the barn together. The smell of hay, leather, and horse filled the air immediately. Daniel moved towards the chestnut mare stall and rested one hand gently along the animal's neck. Easy, he murmured. The mess settled under his touch. Tom watched with a faint smile. You ever think maybe you should have been a horse trainer instead of inheriting half the county? Daniel snorted softly. I didn't exactly apply for the job. Tom chuckled. Fair point. They walked quietly for a while, checking feed, tightening a loose latch, discussing which pasture would rotate next week. From the outside, Daniel Carter looked like a man with a settled life. He owned more land than anyone else in Silver Creek. The farm brought in more money each year than most people in town would see in a decade. But money had never been the thing that gave his life shape. Faith used to. Daniel had grown up in church. His mother had sung in the choir. His father had led prayer on Sunday mornings when the pastor traveled. Back then, faith had felt simple. God was good. Life made sense and prayer had answers. Then the accident came. Daniel had not stopped believing in God after that. He just stopped expecting him to answer. The quiet space between heaven and earth felt wider now. Sometimes when he stood in the field at sunset, Daniel wondered if God still saw him at all. He never said that out loud, but the thought returned often. Tom finished tightening a bolt and wiped his hand on a rag. Heading into town later? He asked. Daniel shook his head. Too much to do here. Tom nodded. See you later. Daniel stepped outside the barn again, the wide Montana sky stretching endlessly above him. The day looked ordinary, peaceful, the kind of day a man could move through without expecting anything unusual. He did not know. By that evening, a storm would roll across these same fields, and when it did, something would step out of it that would change everything. After Osahon and his uncles arrived that morning, the whole compound felt smaller. Their voices drifted in from the front yard in waves, low male tones, measured, respectful, and deliberate, the sort of conversation that carried the weight of custom, elders, and expectation. Eseosa stayed inside just long enough to set down the calabash she had been holding. Her mother, Iye Aigbe, was already moving differently with that nervous energy women carried when marriage discussion began. She adjusted her wrapper twice, glanced towards the doorway, then towards Eseosa, as if she wanted to say something but was not yet ready to say it plainly. Instead, she said, Eseosa, take the clay pot and fetch water before the sun rises too high. Eseosa nodded. She knew her mother had seen the look on her face, but in their world, some things were not spoken immediately. They moved around them first, circled them, and let them sit in the room before giving them names. That's the way it was in the African culture. Eseosa bent and lifted the clay pot, resting it lightly against her hip as she stepped out of the hut. She did not look towards the men seated under the shade tree, but she felt it when Osahon's eyes followed her, not in an improper way or boldly, just with the certainty of a man who had already begun to think of her as part of his future. That feeling tightened something in her chest. She crossed the compound and stepped onto the narrow footpath that led to the stream. The morning was still young. Dew clung to the edges of broad green leaves. The red earth was cool beneath her feet. Somewhere farther off, a woman called after her child. A rooster crowed from a neighboring compound. Smoke from early cooking fires rose in pale threads into the morning air. Normally, that part calmed her. Normally, by the second bend, where the tall grasses opened briefly to reveal a cluster of palm trees, she would feel her breathing slow. But not this morning. Her thoughts were too loud. She walked past cassava mounds and low shrubs, past the tree stumps where children sometimes sat to crack palm kernels, past the little patch of wildflowers she always noticed without really meaning to. This time she noticed nothing. She was praying, not with polished words. This was the kind of prayer a person prayed when their heart was being pulled into two directions. Lord, I need you. Her fingers tightened around the neck of the clay pot. I do not know how to explain what I feel. My father sees sense in this. My mother sees peace in it. The elders will say it is a good thing. And maybe they are right. But every time I think of becoming Osahon's wife, something inside me becomes quiet in the wrong way. The wind shifted slowly through the palm trees. You know me better than anyone, Lord. You know I am not stubborn. You know I do not want to bring shame to my father's house. But I am afraid of saying yes to a life you did not choose for me. And that was the deepest part of it. Not fear of marriage itself, fear of missing God, fear of calling duty what was never direction. Please, if this part is not mine, do not let me enter it, even if I do not understand you at first. Guide me. The stream was not far now. She could already hear it faintly, water moving over stones, steady and familiar. And because prayer and song has become twins in her life, her lips began to move before she even thought about it. Very softly at first, almost under her breath. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and grief to be. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. By now she had reached the stream. The banks were damp, edged with reeds and overhanging branches. The water was brown, green, and alive with the small shifting pattern of current and reflected light. She knelt and set the pot down carefully. For a brief moment, all seemed normal. So normal that later, if anyone had asked, she would not have been able to say exactly when the world began to change. Maybe it was the sudden stillness. Maybe it was the way the birds stopped singing all at once. Maybe it was the air thickening, though the day had only just begun. Eseosa dipped the pot into the water, but even as she did, something made her lift her head. The sky. Only then did she notice it. The light had changed, not gradually, not like normal clouds gathering before rain. It was as if a shadow had passed across the morning itself. The sun had not disappeared completely, but its warmth was gone. The trees looked darker. The reeds along the bank bent under a wind she had not felt arrive. She straightened slowly. A small unease crept through her. Rain? She murmured. She lifted the pot quickly, water sloshing against the rim, and turned towards the path home. That was when she saw the fog. Not ahead of her at first, but moving between the trees, low and pale and strangely thick. It rolled in too fast, swallowing the path in pieces. A sensible part of her mind said to wait, to step back, to let it pass. But another part, the same part that had spent months praying for God's direction, felt a pull she could not explain. Not peace exactly, but a deep, strange knowing that this moment was not empty. The first drops of rain began to fall, large cold drops that struck her shoulder and arms. Then more. Within seconds, the rain thickened into a downpour. The stream behind her hissed under it. Leaves shuddered. Her wrapper clung damply to her skin. Lord, she whispered, turning full circle now, trying to see through the mist. The path home was disappearing. The trees had become shadows, and in front of her, where the footpath should have been, the fog had gathered into something almost shaped like an opening, a veil trembling in the air. A part of her wanted to run, another part of her stood still. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then came the prayer she would later remember word for word. Jesus, if this is you, hold me. If this is not you, keep me, but do not leave me. The wind rose sharply. The clay pot slipped from her arms and shattered on a stone. Eseosa gasped and stepped back in fright, but her heel caught in the wet earth. To steady herself, she stumbled forward, straight into the fog, and the world gave way beneath her.